Good afternoon and welcome to today's UK Column Live. It's the 21st of August, midday. Today we've got myself, Mike Robinson, and Brian Gerrish. I think we're starting with Obama continuing his threats against Syria, and I suppose we need to see this in the context also of what's going on with Israel and Iran.
Well, absolutely. The section of news we've taken is from the Daily Mail, where there's quite a major article where Obama is threatening Syria with US military action if the Assad regime crosses the red line by using chemical weapons. And I think it's been very interesting to see how the media, so the international and the British and American media, have steadily whipped up the campaign against Syria. And of course, here we have mirror image of Iraq, that all of a sudden we're worried about the chemical weapons capability of Syria. I think my point on this would be that this capability hasn't appeared out of nowhere. So presumably, if it exists, it's been sitting there for some time. Why is it only now that the subject's been raised? And my guess would be because extra leverage is considered to be necessary by the British and American regimes in order to put further pressure on President Assad. But what's particularly interesting about the Daily Mail report here is the language. So in the very first sentence it says that President Barack Obama said on Monday that his administration would rethink its opposition to military intervention in the Syrian civil war if President Bashar Assad deploys weapons of mass destruction. And of course the key term here is civil war. So the situation in Syria has been taken from disturbance in the country through to what is now going to be fully broadcast as a civil war, putting additional pressure. And Obama gives us a little bit more of a clue to intentions regarding Syria, because he goes on to say, with regard to so-called stockpiles of chemical weapons in Syria, that's an issue that doesn't just consider, I beg your pardon, I'll start again. That's an issue that doesn't just concern Syria, it concerns our close allies in the region, including Israel. It concerns us. And he also acknowledged the possibility that militant groups might acquire some of these weapons. So the key thing here is that we are actually seeing no substance, just as with Iraq, to support these accusations of stockpiling of chemical weapons. But of course what we do know is going on is that rebel forces, whoever they may be, are now being fully supported by both the Americans and the British administration. And of course our own Foreign Secretary William Hague has announced that Britain is providing both funding and other forms of intelligence help to the rebels. It's quite an amazing situation, really.
Well, I think that one of the fascinating aspects to this from a political point of view is the difference in attitude between the British political establishment and the Americans and the Israelis, because in both America and Israel we've got a major opposition to any attack. So in America, Obama, the mainstream media may be implying it's a done deal, but Obama has a lot of opposition within his own military against any kind of intervention in Syria.
Yeah.
In Israel, there's absolutely an opposition within all the establishment institutions, the opposition parties, the IDF, and the likes of Shin Bet and intelligence agencies. There's an opposition to an attack on Iran, but in Britain, there doesn't seem to be any real opposition to what the British government is doing in the Middle East at the moment, and I think that's one of the really key aspects of this. We need to encourage, shall we say, some kind of opposition.
Well, I wonder whether it's true to say an opposition doesn't exist, or there is an opposition within Britain, but at the moment we're not seeing any of the comment against what's happening and what we're being told coming into the mainstream media. And of course, although it's a sensitive issue, the other thing that we've got at the moment is an extremely powerful lobby by conservative friends of Israel, who specifically said that they have influence with over 80% of the Conservative Party at the moment. Yeah. So once we look at these very, very serious cases of wars and turbulence being created overseas, and we have mention of whether allegiance is to Britain and what is best for Britain and what is best for Israel, things suddenly become very blurred. And we know that within the Jewish community in the UK at the moment, there are many people who are very concerned at what's actually happening on the doorstep of Israel, because of course it holds huge risks for Israelis. So I think the main thing for me is the fact that the mainstream media in Britain is simply not getting into the facts of what's happening. Yeah. I've added a little bit on the subject of Syria, because of course we've also had a very nasty car bomb going off in Turkey on Monday night, which killed about 8 people and wounded dozens more. And the key thing about this is that the bomb itself went off close to the Syrian border, in an area where there's been a huge influx of refugees trying to escape the trouble in Syria. So when we're talking about this critical issue of Syria, of course it has the inevitable consequence of starting to affect other countries in close proximity.
Well, I think the key thing here is that William Hague is, without a shadow of a doubt in my mind anyway, assisting and financing terrorist groups. Now, not all the Syrian opposition are terrorist groups, but the terrorist groups are absolutely getting on the bandwagon and are benefiting from British intervention in Syria. And so I think we're going to see much more of this kind of silliness going on in the next few weeks and months.
So probably what we could do from UK Column Live is to put out a challenge to Mr. William Hague to actually produce factual evidence as to who these freedom fighters are in Syria. Can we please know who they are, how they're divided up, who they're led, and most importantly, who is actually funding the people who are now supposedly fighting a civil war in Syria? My prediction is that Mr. William Hague will produce no evidence whatsoever.
Indeed.
Okay, what have we got here? I think the next story is on civil servants. Let's just see what we've got coming up on the screen. I think you've got some comments on this one, Mark.
Well, this is the second part of an article that began yesterday, I believe, in the Mail, where the Mail exposed that civil servants are so annoyed with the fact that the coalition has failed to meet any of its agenda objectives. That the civil service, or some people within the civil service, are now starting to get involved in party politics themselves, and are going to help the Labour Party write its next manifesto. And I just find this absolutely a staggering state of affairs, where the civil service is supposed to be merely independent administrators. They're not supposed to get involved with politics at all, really, party politics. And here we have them absolutely pushing their agenda into a mainstream party, with a view to getting that mainstream party elected as the majority party, so that they can push their agenda in the next Parliament.
Yeah. Well, a term has been used recently by Roger Hayes, chairman of the British Constitution Group, and that term is agenda politics. And the whole point of this phrase, and I think it's very, very accurate, is that what we're actually watching is a puppet show of politics, where the parties change, but the underlying political agenda doesn't. And of course, if we have a look to see where that political agenda is buried, where in fact it's being created, is deep inside the civil service. And I think at that point it's appropriate to actually start to focus on the individuals. I've got a couple of, that's better, we can see them now. But we should remember that at the moment we've got Francis Maude, Minister for the Cabinet Office, who is working hand in glove with Bob Kerslake and Jeremy Haywood, the two joint heads of the civil service. And the UK column in particular has done a huge amount of research to actually show that what is going on behind closed doors is the political reframing, the political training of our civil servants in order to get this ongoing political agenda through. This is not guesswork. We've shown that in closed door meetings, the political charity Common Purpose was actually bidding for contract work to retrain the top 200 civil servants. And of course, this is going on through the School of Local Government. It's also going on through the Local Government Association, where we don't have civil servants who are selected for their capability, their high standards, and their intellect. What we are now getting is civil servants who are being put through a political indoctrination program. And of course, it's very easy to see who is doing this. And if we focus back on Francis Maude, who at the start of his tenure with the Conservative administration boasted of how transparent that administration would be, it's an absolute fact that when members of the public have asked questions about this political training, which is going on both with Bob Kerslake's team and the behavioural change team, the cabinet so-called leadership team, Francis Maude's office has worked to block and prevent the release of information into the public domain. And the thing which they appear most scared about at the moment is any of the documentation connecting the contracts, documentation connected with the contracts for the training of these civil servants. So this story, which you've actually brought up, I think is the tip of an iceberg, and probably it's worthy of a proper investigative documentary by UK Column Live.
I think that's right, but we could say that we've had agenda politics for a long time, in the sense that the agenda never seems to change no matter who's in power. But I think this is a significant shift in a certain respect, in the sense that this is just being pushed out right in front of your face. Now they've effectively challenged us. They're saying, right, well, we're telling you that we're doing it. What are you going to do about it? And I think we've got to push this point a lot harder and start getting some people pushing back on it.
Well, we certainly need to get more people interested in doing something of it. What does it represent? As far as I'm concerned, what we're actually looking at is now the final stages of the destruction of any form of democratic government in Westminster. So we've wiped out the Liberal Democrat Party. We're now left with a so-called two-party state. And what's happening in the background? Well, policy is now being made by the civil service, which is going to be a common policy between the parties. So actually, we're now dismantling the party system. Yeah. And this is very, very dangerous stuff. And we need people to really wake up to these dangers. So if you're not aware of this, please get digging. As we always say, get in touch with your MPs and see whether you can actually get them to wake up. If they're not waking up, they need to be exposed. But people need to really get stuck into this topic, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we move on to more of the same in a way, because another major headline by the Mail today concerns what they're calling Dave's dinner parties. And they're pointing out that the staggering sum of £790,948 flowed into the Tory party coffers after a series of controversial and private, that actually means secret, controversial private dinners and parties with donators to the Tory party. The article's also pointing out that whilst David Cameron and his Bullingdon Club team are pulling in money from the great and the good, Labour is desperately trying to hang on to its funding from the mainstream unions. And the article is saying that more than half of Labour's donations have come from the unions, but they got £500,000 less than 3 months earlier. Now, I think the key issue here is the fact that people who fund the mainstream political parties are actually controlling the parties. I don't think we can get away with that. And yet, far from transparency, as we've just said with Francis Maude, David Cameron is working very hard to keep the activities of his funding stream secret. One of the incidents that did reach the mainstream press, but was only ever reported as a small paragraph, was, of course, a Finnish Israeli gentleman by the name of Zabludowicz, had provided £15,000 to David Cameron's personal leadership campaign. And certainly for us, it would seem that if all of this is perfectly okay and above board and lawful and legal, then full details of who these people are and when these fundraising events took place should come into the public domain.
Well, the point that I would make is that any time that there's any kind of restriction on our civil liberties, CCTV, monitoring of internet use, whatever it is, the usual rhetoric which is run out is if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. And I think we could make the same, throw that straight back at them over this kind of where they're getting their funding from.
I think this is absolutely right. And of course, what we usually see is that they have got something to be fearful about because they never want to give the information out. But it's a very simple rule, isn't it? If you want to know what's going on, follow the money. And at the moment, we are starting to realise that our mainstream parties are not working for the British public. They're working to an agenda which is set by other people, some of whom are what we might describe as raw international bankers, and others seem to have rather deeper, darker agendas at work.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one is the Treasury Select Committee report into the LIBOR scandal. And just to remind people, LIBOR was the interbank lending rate. Now, the reason that this was being, the major reason I think that this was being fixed wasn't so much the interest rate that banks were paying when they lent money to each other. It was more the fact that LIBOR was being used to as a benchmark for a number of derivatives contracts and lots of derivatives trading. So that was why it was mainly important. Now, the Treasury Select Committee have come out and basically said that they were shocked at the scale of this fixing, and really my response to that would be why, because everybody knew that was going on, and it's clear from the report that the emails that they had discovered passing between Timothy Geithner in the United States and King in the UK, who's the governor of the Bank of England, show that they certainly knew that this was going on right back as far as 2007, 2008. Now the Treasury Select Committee, of course, has no real teeth, but they've made some recommendations, which means they're recommending higher fines and criminal sanctions for people that are caught with partaking in this kind of fraudulent activity, although they don't call it that. But I have a quote here from Andrew Tarry, who's the chair of the Select Committee, and a fantastic quote. He's saying, "Firms must be encouraged to report to the regulator instances they find of their own misconduct, while such a firm should still be required to pay compensation to any other party who's been disadvantaged by the misconduct in cases where a firm makes a complete admission of its own culpability to the FSA. Its own culpability. The FSA should retain flexibility in setting the fine payable. The FSA should have regard to the desirability of encouraging other firms to confess their misdemeanors in a similar way." So basically what the Treasury Select Committee seems to be saying is it's all right for these guys to be corrupt, but if they get caught, they've got to put their hands up straight away. And if they put their hands up straight away, they'll get a reduced fine probably. And other firms that are part of the conspiracy should also be putting their hands up at the same time. And it's all very woolly language and not really firm enough, I believe. Really what these banks are doing is criminal activity. It should be called criminal activity. There should be criminal sanctions when they get caught. And to say that they should effectively self-regulate or admit their misdemeanors, and the fact that he's even calling it a misdemeanor is already implying that it's not really that serious. It's staggering that even after all that's happened, the Treasury Select Committee isn't being significantly more forceful in their response.
Well, is it incredible? In some ways, it isn't incredible, is it? Because if we actually look into the background, what we have seen coming to the surface, really, over many years, is this intimate relationship between British politicians and bankers. We had it with Blair and Gordon Brown attending private parties with the likes of the Rothschilds. And at the end of the day, if we look at who is controlling the money, it comes down to the private banks, not the government. So it's reasonable to assume that, I think it's reasonable to assume that what we've actually got going on is that the financial industry itself is actually driving the whole agenda. And yes, it's absolutely true that the language here, I think, is the language of fiddling. So for anybody else, we would be dealing in terms of criminal activity. If you steal a sweatshirt from the shop, that's criminal activity. If you steal somebody's money via fiddling with interest rates and being deceitful in your business trading, then a different rule applies for the banks. And until the British public actually decide they're going to take their elected representatives to task over this, we're going to have a two-tier justice system.
Yeah.
But it's what's interesting is how arrogant these people are becoming in actually telling us what they're doing. You know, there's one rule for ordinary people and there's a completely different rule for others. It needs to be stopped. Otherwise, I think we're heading for very perilous times. Yeah. Well, money makes the world go round, and virtually every subject that is coming up in the news at the moment is to do with the effects of money. And a topic that I've picked up from the Mail again today is very, very serious and extremely interesting, because it's saying that the Navy is running out of sailors to man its nuclear fleet. And when you read this article, the article has been, in my opinion, incredibly carefully written, because it's really actually hiding a lot of the truth while telling some of it. But the key part of the story is that there is now a massive shortage of young, particularly weapons engineers, who are absolutely key people on board nuclear submarines, or indeed any other type of submarine, as these are the people that obviously keep all of the technical weapons type systems operating and sensors. And without the expertise of these people, submarines can simply not do their job. So these are mid-seniority people. The article's talking about a shortage of weapons engineering lieutenants in particular. And if you haven't got these people on board, you may well have a multi-100 million pound submarine, but the submarine is not going to function because you can't operate sensors and weapons. So the article talks about the fact that we now have got to the pitiful situation where some submarines are going to sea with only 85% manning. And of course this is dangerous enough on board a normal submarine due to the hazardous nature of the operations and the vessel itself. But of course the moment we're dealing with nuclear submarines, and particularly the Trident vessels that have got nuclear missiles on board, then we've got a very, very dangerous situation emerging. But the Ministry of Defence has said that we shouldn't be worried about this. The paper's chosen to get comment on the situation from Lord West, who's who's been a very prominent ex-admiral who's supposedly given the government advice on security and counter-terrorism issues. That's when he hasn't been partying with the ABBA girls. But basically, if you read the article through, what you can actually see is the demise of nuclear capability, because if we can't put Trident submarines to sea, Britain does not have a nuclear deterrent. And the UK column has been warning and warning and warning over about 4 or 5 years now that the agenda of this combined political administration, so Tory parties and Lib Dems and Labour, is to collapse Britain's independent nuclear deterrent. And the fact that David Cameron locked us into a 5-year so-called defence partnership with the French, where the French had access to our civilian nuclear programme, was a key part of it. So I would recommend that as many people as possible read this article. And whilst some viewers and listeners might have reservations about whether a nuclear deterrent is right or wrong, what I would suggest is any decision that we're going to be removed of that capability should be taken in a proper and full debate within Westminster and not slipped in through the background. So I'm sure that any military people watching the programme today will be interested in this. And as an ex-military person myself, I think we've got a very, very dangerous situation emerging under Cameron's hand.
Are they going to make up the shortfall with some French personnel, do you think?
Well, I think that could well be the case, and whether this has already happened. 2 years ago, we had the situation where one of Britain's Trident nuclear submarines had an underwater collision with the French equivalent, the Triomphant. We never heard any public reports of the damage. Many of the papers said this was an accident. I have to totally disagree, because the safety measures for the operation of Britain's nuclear deterrent fleet are so onerous. These two vessels were clearly put in close proximity as far as some joint training programme went, and the result was an absolute disaster. But of course, this has all been kept absolutely silent. But I think, yes, we are going to see a strong push to actually get European and particularly French naval forces in joint manning programmes. Where does that take us to? Well, that brings us on really to the subject of, we've just got a picture of one of the Trident submarines there, just to show you the sheer size of these vessels. But we'll move on to the next story, which is NHS hospitals, which are now going to sell their expertise abroad.
Before we discuss that,
right,
is it just a coincidence that everything's from the Mail today? Perhaps we should just comment on that.
Well, that's true. We have chosen quite a lot of material from the Mail today. In fact, it's interesting looking across all the mainstream papers that there seems to be a dearth of real news. But we'll say to viewers and listeners that we hope in our programmes across the week that we do get a reasonable spread of articles. And I know that last week we were showing articles from The Guardian and The Telegraph. So we are scanning all papers, but today, yes, we have quite a few articles. So here we are with the big headline, NHS hospitals to set up in China and the Gulf. And what is fascinating about this story is that apparently it's the Olympic opening ceremony which has actually triggered the NH hospitals to start this drive. I find this difficult to believe, because I would have thought that for an industry the size of the NHS, it would have had to have started a sort of marketing campaign many months, if not years earlier. But apparently it was just the Olympic opening ceremony. And here we've got the situation where Britain's NHS is collapsing at home, and whilst we fully support all the hard work of nurses and doctors, we've got the situation of in some cases, utter chaos appearing as a result of government policy in NHS hospitals. But suddenly the Olympics has galvanised the NHS to offer their services overseas.
Well, before you go on to the next one, I would just make 2 points here. I mean, first of all, the idea of hospitals being profit centres, I think, is primarily profit centres. I think is something that any country that's inviting the NHS to come and set up a hospital should be concerning themselves about.
Yeah.
The other thing is bearing in mind the quality of the quality of management in the NHS at this stage in the game. You would have to question whether it's actually a sellable product, even setting aside the profit motive as being the primary motivation. You've got to question whether it's a sellable product at this point.
Well, of course, a lot of the article is actually stressing that it's to do with technology and capability. The one thing that isn't being emphasised is to do with humanity and care and looking after people who are sick and injured. Yeah. What's actually being pushed here is our technology, and I would suspect that the big pharma, so the drug industry, is also not far behind this drive. I've just put up a picture of the Telegraph to show that we are looking at other papers. And the interesting thing about the picture here, of course, it's part of the Olympic ceremony, and fascinating that the image of the NHS that was chosen to be put forward to billions of people worldwide was not today's NHS, but of course we're looking at very, very well-dressed and smart nursing staff here from years gone by. And it's very, very interesting, isn't it, that on one hand we've seen this massive change, which now means if you walk into a hospital, you're not too sure who's actually treating you because it could be a member of the public. But when we want to show an image of what the NHS was like and be proud of it, we go back to times gone by. And the other thing will just pop up on the screen. A little bit of a dark photograph in many ways, but of course here is the Olympic opening ceremony, which featured something between 200 and 300 children on hospital beds, and one of them floats up in the air and is offered to the Dark Lord Voldemort. Now I'm not going to comment too much on this, but if the Olympic ceremony has really triggered the NHS to offer its services overseas, I would like somebody in the NHS to explain how they see a linkage between the Dark Lord Voldemort and providing care for people who are sick and ill. Something strange going on, I think. We've got time for one more, very quick one. This is really just to flag up to viewers and listeners an organisation which has come to our attention called Full Fact. You might like to go and have a look at this website yourself. It calls itself an independent organisation which is promoting accuracy in public debate. And essentially this organisation is supposedly checking and highlighting where the press and media are being inaccurate in their reporting. However, we have to say that when the UK column accurately and correctly and appropriately reported on the fact that Roger Hayes, chairman of the British Constitution Group, was put through a court system of which he was not informed of the hearing, and then later there was no jury and he had no defence. Our article was called Conspiracy Theory by this organisation. We challenged them. They did make some corrections, but they've refused to acknowledge that the original article was a UK column article. We'd just like to say today that it's interesting to note that Full Fact is funded by Esme Fairburn, Joseph Rowntree and the Nuffield Foundation, who just happen to be three of the key people who are funding Julia Middleton's Media Standards Trust. So if you want to really have a look at what's happening in manipulation of the media, please do dig into Full Fact. Okay,
so thanks for watching. That's our show for today. We'll see you tomorrow. I think Louise will be in, perhaps.
Yes, we think so.
And so
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.